What's up, guys? I'm Jake.
And I'm the Fat Flash.
He is that.
This week, on Nerd Bites, we're going to decide if reboots are really worth doing.
We're going to talk some comic picks of the week.
And I'm going to let you know what I thought of Superman Returns and how it should have been better.
I can't wait.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. It's time for a nerd versus nerd debate.
This week on the debate, we're going to discuss whether or not movie reboots are worth doing. Settle down. We're going to discuss whether or not movie reboots are worth doing.
They're not.
We know Jake's stance on this issue. My stance is that reboot them.
Why?
Because it's awesome. You get a new, interesting take on an already existing story. You get to take something that, for the most part, is generally loved. They don't remake movies that are just garbage.
They remake movies and turn them into garbage, which is so much better.
If you're looking at specific instances, yes, not every reboot's going to be out of the park amazing. But there are reboots that are just so good that you can't turn away, and they're awesome to watch.
Or they're like a train wreck. You still end up watching it, but it's still not good.
Aside from Total Recall, name one reboot that is just garbage.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
That's almost
Conan.
a different story, though. I don't even count Conan. Conan is not a reboot. Conan isn't retelling. Those are two very different things. A reboot is when you take the original source material and tell that same story. The Conan reboot was not that. That wasn't even watchable. I don't think that's a movie.
It wasn't watchable.
That's not a movie.
I tried. It's not watchable. I couldn't get through it. It's not happening.
So that brings us up to reboots are awesome.
They're not awesome.
They're awesome.
They're not awesome. And I'll tell you why.
Let's hear why.
You ruin the cult classics that we have. There's a reason that they're called cult classics. Because it's just something you don't mess with. You go back and you watch it again and again and again and again because you can't make it any better than it is. So don't touch it. Leave it alone. It's in a little corner. Go away. Just like you. And your reboots. No.
Let me tell you why you're wrong. The reason you're wrong is because these cult classics, as you call, when they get rebooted, such as the Evil Dead reboot, go back and watch the first Evil Dead and the second Evil Dead. You know what those movies are missing? Effects that are worth watching. It was awesome in the 80s to watch practical effects be done on screen like that. The reboot takes an already existing story in Evil Dead and completely turns it on its head. Gives you new characters following the same path. And what that means is you get a new telling of a story from some other person's perspective. And on top of that, you don't see Ash spinning in a circle with the background. It was just confusing and it looked weird.
Okay, so you got one. What else you got?
What other reboots do I have that are awesome? I love the Nightmare on Elm Street remake for the simple fact that you get to figure out what Freddy Krueger's backstory is. It's always implied that he liked to touch kids, but it isn't specifically said until they do the reboot, which you delve into in a complete other part of insanity that really adds to the mythos of the character and just furthers along the idea of these movies.
But that's part of the thing, though. Did we really need to delve into that realm?
Yes, you need to delve into that realm.
Why? You already
The
have the
same
idea
exact
that
reason you delve into it in the Halloween remake. For the simple fact that, yes, it's cool to see Michael Myers as the systematical killer that you don't know anything about. But at the same time, give him a reason. Find that backstory. Have a reason for him to do these things. You tell his story from when he's a kid to when he grows up, and you feel for the character. It gives you emotional attachment to these characters that were missing in the early times when they were shooting movies, because character development, to be honest, wasn't a huge thing in the 80s. Nobody cared about developing characters. They cared about what was going to get a laugh, what was going to get a scream. Movies weren't made to tell stories back then. They were made to get a reaction. The Exorcist didn't tell a story. It told you to react to a little girl in a horrible situation.
In the same breath, though, you're talking about a select group of movies. If you actually go back to film's heyday, the golden era of film.
So the 60s and like 50s.
Or older, actually.
Eh.
Everything was made to tell a story. That was the entire point of film, was to tell a story.
Name a movie from that time period that told a story other than Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz.
Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz. I mean, of course you're going to pick on those.
No, I said those tell stories. Name other
Right,
movies
I
that
understand.
tell stories from that time period besides those two movies.
Well, let me see. Let me just go off the top of my head here. How about Psycho? Psycho's actually from that time period.
The story that it tells is, this is a slasher film. It doesn't tell you anything about Norman Bates' backstory. You don't get a feel for the character. You know his mom's dead and he's imitating her. And he's pretending mommy's still alive. It doesn't tell you the story
Wouldn't
of
that be
why
a
it's
story?
happening. It's not a story. It's, I don't like people staying in my hotel who are promiscuous. It's the original slasher flick.
It is, but it still had enough storyline there to be.
You can fill an hour and 45-minute runtime with people are going to freak out because it's the first time they've seen it.
Let's
That
not
was
make
a
that
reaction movie.
I'm
It was not a
comfortable.
story movie. It was a reaction movie. Don't get me wrong. I love Hitchcock. The Birds, I love it. But they're not story-based movies. They're built on the reaction the crowd's going to give for the scenes that they're seeing. There's two very different aspects to telling a story and making people squirm.
So we actually had this conversation last night.
We did.
Before we ever obviously put it on film. And there was a few movies that he had no argument for. So I'm going to throw those at you.
Go for it.
How about Misery?
Misery, a movie that hasn't been remade,
It has
should not be remade for the simple fact that, one, there's not really a story to build off of there. There's no way to retell that story in a different light.
And the fact
That
that Kathy
story is
Bates is a
told.
freaking legend.
You can't replace Kathy Bates. It's
You can't.
impossible. But at the same time, that's a story that you can't retell that story in a different way because it wouldn't make sense. The way Stephen King wrote that story and told that story is perfect. There's no rebuilding off of that and rebranding it and turning it into
Let's find
something else.
another one then. How about Back to the Future?
I would love to see a remake of Back to the Future.
Why?
Because you get updated graphics. Christopher Lloyd, still alive, could play Doc Brown again.
Then continue the series. Don't reboot it.
Michael J. Fox cannot be in that movie because nobody will clear him to act. So you have to get a new lead character. Preferably, you want McFly in the movie. Otherwise, it defeats the entire purpose of having the previous 3 movies to continue a story with a new character.
So you have McFly's kid. That's what that took me 30 seconds to come up with.
Okay, cool. Guess what that is? It's a reboot.
No, it's a continuation.
A
of the
continuation of the story can still be a reboot. The new Terminator movie, Genesis, or whatever the heck they call it, because they can't spell.
story. And you can't say it.
That's how it's spelled, Genesis. That's how they spelled it, man. Don't ask me, I didn't write the production on that. But with that, it is a reboot, but it is also a continuation. It's saying that they're sending him back in time,
And I'm okay with that.
but it's a reboot at the same time as a continuation,
just as an example, Ghostbusters. They're starting to reboot that series, all female cast.
which I'm okay with.
I'm okay with the fact that they're coming out with another Ghostbusters. I'm not okay with the fact of how they're doing it. Bring back the original guys, have them pass the torch. I mean, honestly, it makes sense to have that because then you are catering to the original viewers who love the movie and you cater to the brand new audience who is not yet familiar with the actual franchise. So you're taking care of everyone. Instead of just going, you know what, none of that other crap ever happened and we're just starting from scratch.
My problem with that, and my problem with them passing the torch, is one of them's dead. Bill Murray wants nothing to do with it if he has to be in it and actually play his own character. That leaves you Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson. Let me tell you what makes for great films. Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson. Because if I love anything about movies, it's those actors. Dan Aykroyd has been good in 3 things in his entire life. I love Dan Aykroyd as a writer, not an actor. He's not a great actor. Sorry, Dan. You're a good guy, but no, you can't
I love
act.
you, Dan.
You cannot act. Ernie Hudson hasn't been
Don't
good
listen to
since ever. Ernie Hudson, other than tell him about the Twinkie. That's the only line of dialogue he has that's worth remembering in his entire career. And maybe 1 or 2 from The Crow. But those aren't guys that you bring in to pass the torch. You need Murray to do it. Murray won't do it. Murray's not going to pass
It
the
has
torch.
to be a long, drawn-out process.
Even just a little snippet of them going, it's all yours now, kids. It's not going to happen because Murray won't do it. He doesn't want to play the same character.
Murray's already agreed to be in the film.
That's great in a cameo, not playing his original character. If they tell him to play the original character, he won't do it. And the other issue with this is tell a new story. Take the idea of Ghostbusters. People, nerds who want to help people and fight ghosts. It's an awesome story. Tell it from a new perspective, new storyline, new characters. You get Paul Feig in there, who is a wonderful director, directed Bridesmaids. You get Melissa McCarthy in there, who is very funny. And you get this cast of female characters to tell the Ghostbuster stories from their perspective. It's a new perspective on an old story. It doesn't have to pander to the old audience. It doesn't have to pander to the new audience. It's its own film following the legacy of a former movie. That's what reboots should be.
My prediction is it's crap. Take that one.
Your prediction is everything is crap that you haven't seen yet, so I'm not going to listen. The only thing I'm saying is, in my opinion, reboot everything that needs to be rebooted. Look at all this stuff from the old golden age of cinema and find new ways to tell these stories, because what we're lacking is originality. Find an original way to spin an old story since everything's already been done. Find a movie that you loved as a kid and go, you know what? I think I have a good idea. Give us that idea. Tell us that idea. That's what makes movie going exciting to me, is finding old spins on new stories. Lion King is Hamlet. That's all it is. It's a new telling of Hamlet. Keep doing that. Find old stories, retell them in a way that people find interesting and exciting.
I'm not 100%, against reboots. Some things do need to be redone because of the fact of, I agree, some things do have technology issues from back in the day. However, there are quite a few films that just need to be left alone. Just don't touch them. There's no reason to. It just doesn't make sense to redo some of the classic movies or cult movie classics that we, stand on. Blazing Saddles is another, great example of that. There's no way on earth you could ever remake Blazing Saddles. It just couldn't happen. The actors are A, too old at this point, and B, the jokes that were used in that type of film, they don't work nowadays. It was a different time. We still find it funny, but you can't do it now. It's totally different. And there's a lot of movies that are like that you just can't recreate those things or tell it in a new way. We want to know what you think, though.
Tell us how you feel about movie reboots and if you think they're worth doing or if you think, like Jake, and are closed-minded.
And at this point, we're going to close this segment out and we're going to go have a wrestling match.
We're going to have a fight in the back room.
So, yeah. We're not selling tickets to this one, though.
One-on-one. Nerd at nerd.
Just wanted to introduce a new segment this week. This is Fleet. He's the comic manager here at the Wizard's Wagon. So he's going to introduce his picks for his comics this week that is new on the market. What you got, Fleet?
All right, well, first we'll start off with Rumble. This is from Image Comics, put out by John Arcudi and James Heron, with Dave Stewart on art. So this is issue 7 of the series about a vengeful scarecrow god who has come to modern times to slaughter monsters who are masquerading as people. It's amazing, and I think more people need to read this. And then secondly is the release of the Howard the Duck trade, Volume 0. It's of the newest series from Marvel Now, or for the Marvel Now line. And it's by Chip Zdarsky and Joe Quinones. It's completely ridiculous. There's a running gag with Spider-Man where he keeps getting depressed and sad because he can't help Howard out. He gets abducted. He's like, oh, I couldn't save Howard. I couldn't save my uncle either. And it just keeps going. And like there's a thing with Aunt May. You just see Spider-Man or Peter Parker just steaming mad because he couldn't do anything about it. It's just another fun thing to read. And if you haven't been reading this, you definitely should check it out.
So there you go, guys. Those are actually out already. Those came out on Wednesday, New Comic Wednesday. He puts these out every Tuesday night in preparation for your monies to walk in the door to buy them. So come on down to the Wizard Wagon, get your new comics.
What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of Fan Fiction. A little segment we like to do on the show here where I sit and I bash comic book movies, science fiction movies, and movies alike because I didn't like them and I want to see them done better. This week, I'm going to talk about the Man of Steel Superman. Last week I talked about Batman, so we're going to give the opposition a little love. And I'm going to be referring specifically to the 2004 movie Superman Returns. My issues with this movie stem from a long line of issues that everybody had with this movie. For one, Superman doesn't need a kid. We don't need to add that emotional drama into the film where Lois had an illegitimate child that Superman doesn't know is his until later in the film. You got the Man of Steel, strongest guy in the universe, most OP character in comic history. What is he missing? Guess what? It's not an illegitimate child. Trust me, that's not what he's missing out on in his arc. On top of that, you get rid of Luthor. You don't need Luthor as your villain again. We've seen it too many times. Yes, he's his arch nemesis. He's a bald guy who has no powers. Superman gets his butt kicked by a bald guy with no powers way too often in the movies. We need to take a step back and have him actually fight somebody. This is before Man of Steel comes out, so obviously there's now that Zod fight that was essentially Dragon Ball Z, the movie. So instead, we have this take a step back, and we have him fight somebody along the lines of Brainiac. You bring Brainiac into this movie because you need Superman to fight a villain that is formidable, but isn't going to kill him in his first appearance in a new saga of movies. So I'm sorry, Doomsday fans. I don't want Doomsday in this one. He should be in the sequel. You don't do the death of Superman in his return movie. It seems a little odd. The other thing you do is you get rid of pretty much everything in that movie that revolved around kryptonite because apparently whoever wrote that didn't know how kryptonite works on Superman. At one point in the movie, he lifts up a kryptonite continent. Kryptonite's supposed to take away Superman's power, not make him lift continents and throw them into space. Seemed a little off to me, but who am I to judge? The other thing you do is you cut down the runtime. This movie's like 2.5 hours long, but it's not 2.5 hours of Superman goodness. It's 2.5 hours of just telling Clark Kent and Lois Lane's story with maybe 20 minutes of Superman in that whole movie. Not really making sense still. You're with me? Yeah, it seems odd to me too. The other thing that we got to do is have him fight Brainiac. You have him fight the Brainiac robots. You have him have this long standoff with Brainiac. You introduced the bottled city from his home planet. You introduce his cousin. You introduce all these aspects that Superman is desperately missing. You don't have him be the only superpowered guy in this movie for the simple fact that he's fighting Brainiac, who's a very formidable villain of his. It makes sense to have Supergirl come into this mix and fight alongside him. This movie overall is unwatchable for the simple fact that whoever wrote it has never read a Superman comic in their life. As much as I love Kevin Spacey, get rid of Luthor completely. You don't need him in the movie. We've seen Gene Hackman as Luthor. Didn't work then that well. It's not going to work now that well. Luthor doesn't work as a villain. Bald men shouldn't beat up superheroes, especially when they have no powers. It's just odd. This movie overall to me was a horrible chance and just a horrible, horrible way to look at Superman and say, you know what we need in this movie? All this stuff that didn't make sense. You bring in Brainiac. You keep Brandon Routh as Superman. He did a good job. It's not Brandon Routh's fault that movie was bad. It was written horribly. You get rid of pretty much that 2.5 hour runtime. Make it an hour 45. Put in the Brainiac stuff. Put in Supergirl. Give me more of a reason to like Superman. Because right now, watching that movie, I just think he's a terrible parent. He's got all this power in the world. He's got X-ray vision. He can hear from space. Didn't know Lois had a kid, though. What kind of omnipotent being doesn't know that his girlfriend is having a child? Does that seem off still a little bit? Yeah. So my thing, keep Brandon Routh. Get a new writer. Bring in Brainiac, Supergirl. Have him fight a villain. Get rid of Lex Luthor. Cut down the runtime. And you may have had yourself a successful Superman movie that actually stick close enough to the mythos to make it worth watching. Well, that's going to be it for fan fiction.
So, and that's going to wrap it up for this week as well. So as always, we need you to like, comment,
subscribe,
and share.
because sharing is caring.
You say that every week.
But yet
No.
nobody figures it out. We care about you. Care about us. Until next week, guys. We love you.
As always.